Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 34. Synthesis, the Joseph narrative as Genesis conclusion and Torah's bridge. The Joseph narrative, spanning Genesis chapters 37 to 50, stands as a pivotal segment within the book of Genesis, serving as both the culmination of the patriarchal stories and a critical transition to the broader narrative of the Torah, which encompasses the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This section shifts the focus from the episodic accounts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the cohesive, novella-like tale of Joseph, Jacob's favored son, whose journey from betrayal and enslavement to leadership in Egypt ensures the survival of his family and positions the Israelites for their eventual sojourn in Egypt. This narrative resolves the foundational covenantal promises made to the patriarchs: land, numerous descendants, and blessing to all nations, Genesis 12:1-3, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for the central events of the Torah, particularly the Exodus and the establishment of Israel as a covenantal nation under God's law. The Joseph narrative achieves this dual role through its rich theological themes, intricate literary structure, historical and cultural contexts, and enduring interpretive significance, weaving together the threads of Genesis origins with the redemptive arc of the Torah. This detailed exploration examines how the Joseph narrative functions as Genesis conclusion by tying up the patriarchal era's loose ends, familial conflicts, covenantal promises, and the establishment of Israel's tribal identity, while acting as a bridge to the Torah by setting the stage for the Israelites' enslavement, liberation, and nation-building. Key themes such as divine providence, forgiveness and reconciliation, leadership, and communal identity anchor this synthesis, supported by specific textual examples, historical insights, Jewish interpretive traditions, interfaith perspectives, and contemporary relevance. Through this multifaceted lens, the Joseph narrative emerges as a theological and narrative linchpin, unifying the Pentateuch and offering timeless insights into faith, resilience, and communal purpose. 1. Theological framework, resolving the covenant and preparing for redemption. The Joseph narrative serves as the theological capstone of Genesis by fulfilling the covenantal promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, while introducing themes that anticipate the Torah's focus on redemption, law, and nationhood. These promises, land, Canaan, descendants, a great nation, and blessing, for all nations, form the backbone of Genesis, and their resolution in chapters 37-50 marks the narrative's role as a conclusion. Simultaneously, the introduction of providence, forgiveness, leadership, and identity prepares the reader for the dramatic events of Exodus and beyond. Covenantal resolution in Genesis. The patriarchal covenant, first articulated in Genesis 12:1-3, promises Abraham a land, numerous descendants, and a blessing that extends universally. The Joseph narrative brings these promises to a point of fulfillment. Descendants. By the end of Genesis, Jacob's family has grown significantly in Egypt. Genesis 47:27 states, "Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied exceedingly," echoing the earlier promise to Abraham, Genesis 15:5, and foreshadowing the exponential growth noted in Exodus 1:7. Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are formally adopted into the tribal structure, Genesis 48:5-20, ensuring the covenant's continuity through the next generation. Land. Although the family resides in Egypt, the narrative reaffirms the promise of Canaan. Joseph's dying wish, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. Genesis 50:24-25, points forward to the return fulfilled in Joshua 24:32. Jacob's burial in the cave of Machpelah in Canaan, Genesis 50:5-13, alongside Abraham and Isaac, physically ties the family to the promised land, even as they dwell abroad. Blessing. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt transforms him into a conduit of blessing for all nations. Genesis 41:57 records, moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth, fulfilling the universal scope of Genesis 12:3. His administrative foresight during the famine, Genesis 41:33-36, saves not only Egypt but also his own family, extending the covenant's reach. Theological themes bridging to the Torah. Beyond resolving Genesis covenant, the Joseph narrative introduces key theological motifs that set the stage for the Torah's narrative. Divine providence. The story's theological heartbeat is God's sovereign guidance, most poignantly expressed in Joseph's words to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today." Genesis 50:20. This theme resolves Genesis' narrative of human frailty and divine promise, seen in earlier stories like the flood, Genesis 6:9, or the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, by showing God's ability to weave human actions into his redemptive plan. It bridges to the Torah by preparing readers for the dramatic deliverance of the Exodus, where God again intervenes decisively, Exodus 3:7-10. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers, Genesis 45:4-15, after their betrayal, Genesis 37:18-28, heals the familial rifts that punctuate Genesis, Cain and Abel, Genesis 4, Isaac and Ishmael, Genesis 21, Jacob and Esau, Genesis 27:33. The emotional reunion, where Joseph declares, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt, do not be distressed." Genesis 45:4-5, models reconciliation and foreshadows the Torah's ethical imperatives, such as loving one's neighbor, Leviticus 19:18, and the communal unity required at Sinai, Exodus 19:6. Leadership and responsibility. Joseph's transformation from a brash dreamer, Genesis 37:5-11, to a wise ruler, Genesis 41:40-46, and Judah's emergence as a sacrificial leader, Genesis 44:18-34, prefigure the leadership models of the Torah. Joseph's humility. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer, Genesis 41:16, and Judah's willingness to substitute himself for Benjamin echo Moses' intercession, Exodus 32:32, and the kingly ideals of Deuteronomy 17:14-20. Communal identity. Jacob's blessings to his sons in Genesis 49 establish the 12 tribes of Israel, transitioning the covenant from a family to a nation. Phrases like Judah, "Your brothers shall praise you," Genesis 49:8, and the scepter shall not depart from Judah. Genesis 49 hours 10 minutes, lay the groundwork for the tribal organization detailed in Numbers 1:4 and the covenant community at Sinai, Exodus 19:6. Theological significance. The Joseph narrative concludes Genesis by demonstrating the fulfillment of God's promises through providence and human agency, while its thematic richness, providence ensuring survival, forgiveness healing division, and leadership shaping identity, bridges to the Torah's focus on liberation and law. This theological synthesis unifies Genesis' arc from creation to covenant with the Torah's journey from slavery to nationhood, positioning Genesis 37:50 as a critical hinge in the Pentateuch. 2. Narrative structure, a cohesive conclusion and seamless transition. The literary artistry of the Joseph narrative, its novella-like unity, chiastic patterns, and deep characterization, distinguishes it from the fragmented patriarchal narratives, Genesis 12:36, providing closure to Genesis while paving the way for the Torah's nation-building story. Novella structure as conclusion. Unlike the earlier, episodic tales of Abraham's wanderings or Jacob's struggles, Genesis 37:50 unfolds as a continuous narrative with a clear arc. Joseph's dreams and betrayal, Genesis 37, his trials and rise in Egypt, Genesis 39:41, the reconciliation with his brothers, Genesis 45, and the establishment of Israel's tribal future, Genesis 49:50. This cohesiveness resolves Genesis' recurring themes. Sibling rivalry, the conflict between Joseph and his brothers, sparked by jealousy over his dreams, Genesis 37:5-11, reaches resolution in their tearful reunion, Genesis 45:14-15, tying up the motif of fraternal strife seen throughout Genesis. Divine favor, Joseph's journey mirrors the favor shown to Abraham and Jacob, but his story scales it to a national level, with his leadership saving all the earth, Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes. Covenantal continuity, the Toledo framework, these are the generations of Jacob. Genesis 37:2. Culminates in Genesis 49's blessings, solidifying the 12 tribes and concluding the patriarchal era. Chiastic structure as bridge. The narrative employs a chiastic structure, where events mirror one another to emphasize divine providence and continuity. Betrayal and reconciliation, the brothers' sale of Joseph into slavery, Genesis 37:18-28, finds its counterpart in their reconciliation, Genesis 45:4-15, with Joseph's assurance, God sent me before you to preserve life, Genesis 45:5, reframing their sin as part of a divine plan. Dreams and fulfillment, Joseph's youthful dreams of dominance, Genesis 37:5-11, are fulfilled when his brothers bow before him in Egypt, Genesis 42:6, underscoring God's faithfulness across decades. This chiastic pattern not only provides literary closure but also foreshadows the Torah's cyclical themes of exile and redemption, such as the Israelites' departure from Egypt, Exodus 14, and their eventual return to Canaan, Deuteronomy 30. Characterization as transition. The development of key figures bridges the personal focus of Genesis to the communal scope of the Torah. Joseph, his growth from an arrogant youth to a humble leader, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do, Genesis 41 hours 25 minutes, models the moral maturity needed for Israel's future leaders, like Moses, Exodus 18:13-26. Judah, his transformation from orchestrating Joseph's sale, Genesis 37:26-27, to offering himself for Benjamin, Genesis 44:33-34, marks him as a leader, prefiguring the Judahite monarchy, Genesis 49:10, and the Torah's emphasis on responsibility. Supporting figures, Tamar's resilience, Genesis 38, and Asenath's integration, Genesis 41:45, highlight inclusivity, anticipating the mixed multitude of Exodus 12:38 and the Torah's communal vision. Narrative significance. The novella structure unifies Genesis by resolving its conflicts and promises within a single, compelling tale, while the chiastic patterns and character arcs anticipate the Torah's redemptive and ethical framework. The narrative's conclusion, Jacob's death, Genesis 49:33, and Joseph's legacy, Genesis 50:22-26, seamlessly transitions to Exodus 1:8-14, where a new king arises who did not know Joseph, setting the stage for Israel's enslavement and liberation. 3 historical and cultural contexts, grounding the transition. The Joseph narrative's historical setting in the Late Bronze Age, circa 1500–1200 BCE, and its likely composition during the Babylonian exile, 587–539 BCE, anchor its role as both a conclusion to Genesis and a bridge to the Torah, addressing ancient realities and exilic hopes. Late Bronze Age setting. The narrative reflects a plausible historical backdrop. Egyptian context, Joseph's role as vizier, Genesis 41:40–46, aligns with Semitic figures in Egypt, such as the Hyksos rulers, circa 1650–1550 BCE, or viziers like Apel, 14th century BCE. Practices like dream interpretation, Genesis 40:41, and mummification, Genesis 50:23, mirror Egyptian customs, grounding the story in its setting. Tribal dynamics, Jacob's blessings, Genesis 49, reflect tribal identities consistent with ancient Near Eastern, patriarchal traditions, preparing for Israel's emergence as a confederation in the Torah. Babylonian exile composition. Finalized during the exile, the narrative resonates with Judah's displaced community. Exile and restoration, Joseph's journey from slavery to power parallels the exile's hope for return, Isaiah 41:11. His affirmation of providence, Genesis 50:20, counters Babylonian imperial narratives, reinforcing God's control. Communal unity, the reconciliation, Genesis 45, and tribal blessings, Genesis 49, offer a vision of restoration, bridging to the Torah's promise of redemption, Exodus 6:6-8. Engagement with Ain culture. The narrative adapts Ain literary motifs, wisdom tales, for example, Ludlul Bel Nemichi, dream reports, for example, Papyrus Chester BT3, and blessings, for example, Ugaritic texts, to assert Israel's monotheistic faith and covenantal ethics, preparing for the Torah's distinct identity, Exodus 19:5-6. Historical significance. The late Bronze Age setting lends credibility to the covenant's fulfillment, while the exilic context infuses it with hope, making the narrative a bridge from Genesis' patriarchal past to the Torah's redemptive future. 4 Jewish interpretive traditions, enriching the bridge. Jewish exegesis, spanning Midrash, Talmud, Zohar, and medieval commentators like Rashi and Ramban, deepens the Joseph narrative's dual role, connecting Genesis covenant to the Torah's spiritual and ethical vision. Midrash and Talmud. Bereshit Rabbah 89:2 interprets Joseph's dreams as divinely ordained, linking providence to the Exodus. Sota 36b praises his resistance to Potiphar's wife, Genesis 39:9, shaping Torah holiness, Leviticus 19:2. Yoma 86b connects the brothers' repentance, Genesis 42:21-22, to Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16. While Sanhedrin 92 views Genesis 49 as prophetic, unifying the tribes for Sinai. Zohar and Kabbalah. The Zohar casts Joseph as Yesod, foundation, channeling divine blessing, Zohar, Ve'ishev 182a, with his trials purifying the covenant for Sinai. Genesis 49 aligns the tribes with Sphirot, prefiguring Israel's mission. Rashi and Ramban. Rashi ties Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes to the Exodus, while Ramban sees Judah's blessing, Genesis 49:8-12, as Davidic, bridging Genesis to the Torah's messianic hope. Interpretive significance. These traditions enrich the narrative's theology, linking Genesis to Torah law and spirituality, ensuring its relevance across generations. 5 Interfaith significance, a shared Abrahamic narrative. The Joseph narrative resonates in Christianity and Islam, reinforcing its role as a bridge within the Abrahamic traditions. Christianity, Joseph prefigures Christ, Acts 7:9-16, with Genesis 49 hours 10 minutes linked to Jesus' kingship, Revelation 5:5. Islam, Surah Yusuf, Quran 12, mirrors Genesis, emphasizing providence and forgiveness, Quran 12 hours 92 minutes, unifying Abrahamic ethics. 6 Contemporary relevance, timeless lessons. The narrative's themes, providence, forgiveness, leadership, address modern challenges, from spiritual renewal to social justice, extending its bridge to today's world. 7 Conclusion, a theological and narrative cornerstone. The Joseph narrative unifies Genesis by resolving its promises and conflicts, while bridging to the Torah through its theological depth, narrative artistry, and cultural resonance. It invites readers across time to engage its vision of faith, reconciliation, and communal hope, cementing its place as a timeless cornerstone of the Pentateuch. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section. Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 33. Contemporary relevance and applications of the Joseph narrative, Genesis 37:50. The Joseph narrative and conclusion, Genesis 37:50, form the culminating section of the book of Genesis, delivering a cohesive, character-driven story that bridges the patriarchal narratives, Genesis 12:36, with the transformative journey of Joseph, from a betrayed dreamer to Egypt's vizier, ensuring his family's survival and establishing Israel's presence in Egypt as a prelude to the Exodus, Exodus 1:15. Framed by the Toledo generations of Jacob, Genesis 37:2, this narrative integrates the covenantal promises of land, descendants, and blessing, Genesis 12:1-3, with universal themes such as divine providence, forgiveness, teshuvah, repentance, leadership, and communal identity. Likely set in the Late Bronze Age, c. 1500–1200 BCE, and finalized during the Babylonian exile, 587–539 BCE, Genesis 37:50 transcends its ancient origins to address contemporary challenges, including spiritual disconnection, social division, ethical crises, cultural fragmentation, and global inequities. Its literary artistry, marked by vivid characterization, chiastic structure, and recurring motifs like dreams and reconciliation, resonates deeply with modern audiences, informing religious practices, ethical frameworks, social justice movements, interfaith dialogue, and cultural productions. This report explores the narrative's enduring relevance and practical applications across religious renewal, ethical leadership, social advocacy, interfaith cooperation, cultural innovation, and digital engagement, weaving together specific examples, theological insights, and their impact on today's world. Structured thematically, it provides a comprehensive understanding of how Genesis 37:50 continues to shape faith, society, and culture in the 21st century. 1. Religious renewal and spiritual applications. The Joseph narrative serves as a wellspring for religious renewal across Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, offering timeless spiritual insights that address modern quests for meaning, community, and connection with the divine. Judaism. Spiritual resilience. The narrative's emphasis on divine providence, most notably in Joseph's rise to power, Genesis 41:40–46, and his declaration, "God meant it for good," Genesis 50:20, offers Jews a framework for navigating secularism and cultural assimilation. Movements like Jewish renewal draw inspiration from Joseph's journey, using his dreams, Genesis 37:5–11, as symbols of spiritual vision. Organizations such as the Aleph Alliance host retreats that explore these themes, fostering meditative practices rooted in chaste, loving kindness, and trust in a higher plan. Liturgical vitality. Key passages like Genesis 45:4–15, Joseph's reconciliation with his brothers, and Genesis 49, Jacob's tribal blessings, are woven into Selishot prayers and Shabbat services, emphasizing repentance and unity. The theme of providence permeates tefillah, prayer, with digital platforms like Spheria providing midrashic commentaries on Genesis 50:20, enabling virtual worship communities to engage deeply with the text. Digital engagement. In the wake of global shifts toward online spirituality, Torah study groups on platforms like My Jewish Learning use Joseph's leadership in crisis, Genesis 41:33–36, to address resilience, countering the spiritual disconnection reported by Pew Research in recent studies. Christianity. Faith and transformation. Joseph's trials, from slavery, Genesis 37:28, to imprisonment, Genesis 39 hours 20 minutes, and his eventual exaltation, Genesis 41:40-46, inspire Christian spiritual formation. Evangelical and Catholic retreats highlight his integrity in resisting temptation, Genesis 39:9, and his trust in divine providence, Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes, encouraging believers to persevere through uncertainty. Ministries like Focus on the Family apply Genesis 45:4-15 to promote reconciliation within strained relationships. Liturgical renewal. The narrative is a staple in Advent and Lent readings, with Genesis 45:4-15 underscoring forgiveness as a transformative act. Progressive churches incorporate Tamar's story, Genesis 38, to amplify marginalized voices, enriching social justice liturgies with her narrative of agency and justice. Digital worship. Christian mobile applications like YouVersion offer devotionals based on Genesis 37:50, with Joseph's leadership guiding virtual Bible studies. These resources have gained traction in addressing post-pandemic spiritual needs, as noted in Barna Group's recent analyses. Islam. Prophetic legacy. In the Islamic tradition, Surah Yusuf, Quran 12:4101, presents Joseph, Yusuf, as a model of piety, Quran 12:24. Compare Genesis 39:9, and submission to a divine plan, Quran 12:21, compare Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes. Eid al-Adha sermons often cite his forgiveness of his brothers, Quran 12 hours 92 minutes, inspiring devotion and moral reflection among Muslims worldwide. Sufi mysticism. Sufi communities interpret Joseph's trials as an allegory for the soul's ascent, with poets like Rumi in his Masnavi drawing parallels between Joseph's journey and spiritual purification. Modern Sufi gatherings, such as those organized by the Mevlevi order, use Surah Yusuf to foster interfaith spirituality and contemplation. Virtual communities. Online Islamic platforms like Alim explore Surah Yusuf to address secular challenges, offering webinars that connect Genesis 37:50 with Quranic teachings, building global Muslim engagement in an increasingly digital world. Contemporary context. The surge in spiritual seeking following global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic and social unrest has heightened the narrative's relevance. Its themes of providence and reconciliation provide comfort and direction, with digital platforms democratizing access to its wisdom, as reported by the International Telecommunication Union, ITU. Cultural significance. Across these traditions, the narrative fosters resilience and community, with Joseph's acts of chaste, Genesis 45:7-8, guiding both virtual and in-person fellowship. It also inspires interfaith spiritual initiatives, such as the Abrahamic House of Prayer, which unites worshippers through their shared Abrahamic heritage. 2 Ethical frameworks and leadership. The Joseph narrative provides robust ethical frameworks that inform personal morality, leadership principles, and societal values, offering guidance on integrity, justice, and inclusivity in a world grappling with ethical dilemmas. Personal ethics and teshuvah. Judah's evolution from orchestrating Joseph's sale, Genesis 37:26-27, to offering himself as a substitute for Benjamin, Genesis 44:18-34, exemplifies teshuvat, a process of repentance and moral growth. Jewish Mussar programs, such as those run by the Mussar Institute, use Judah's transformation to teach ethical development, while secular ethics courses at institutions like Harvard cite his plea, Genesis 44:33-34, as a case study in moral reasoning. Joseph's steadfast integrity in resisting Potiphar's wife, Genesis 39:9, and his forgiveness of his brothers, Genesis 45:4-15, serve as models for personal conduct. Christian ministries like Willow Creek and Islamic platforms like the Yaqeen Institute apply these episodes to workplace ethics and interpersonal relationships, emphasizing accountability and grace. Leadership and diplomacy. Joseph's strategic foresight in managing Egypt's famine, Genesis 41:33-36, and his humility in attributing success to God, Genesis 41:16, offer a blueprint for ethical leadership. Business schools like Wharton incorporate his crisis management into conflict resolution curricula, while United Nations leadership frameworks draw on his diplomacy with Pharaoh, Genesis 41:40-46, to train global diplomats. Tamar's bold actions to secure her rights, Genesis 38:14-26, highlight women's leadership and agency, inspiring Jewish and Christian programs like the Wexner Foundation to promote gender equity in leadership roles across sectors. Inclusivity and social ethics. The integration of Asenath, an Egyptian, into Joseph's family, Genesis 41:45, and the universal scope of his famine relief, Genesis 41:57, underscore inclusivity. Organizations like HISE, a Jewish refugee agency, cite Genesis 47:27 to advocate for migrant rights, while Christian liberation theologians like Gustavo Gutierrez use Tamar's story to address systemic justice for the marginalized. Jacob's blessings to his sons, Genesis 49, inform community ethics, with Islamic Ummah initiatives drawing parallels to foster unity and collective responsibility within diverse populations. Contemporary context. The rise of ethical consumerism and corporate responsibility aligns with Joseph's chaste, Genesis 45:7-8. As seen in companies like Patagonia adopting sustainable practices inspired by Genesis 41's resource management. Leadership challenges, such as political polarization and diversity, find resonance in Genesis 45:4-15, with organizations like Seeds of Peace applying its lessons to bridge divides. Cultural significance. The narrative's ethical principles bridge religious and secular morality, with Joseph's integrity and Judah's teshuvah shaping personal and societal values. It also inspires leadership development, with interfaith programs like the Elijah Institute using Genesis 41 and 44 to train ethical leaders across traditions. 3. Social movements and advocacy. The Joseph narrative fuels social movements that address reconciliation, gender equity, environmental stewardship, and social justice, providing moral and theological foundations for activism. Reconciliation and conflict resolution. Joseph's reconciliation with his brothers, Genesis 45:4-15, inspires peace-building efforts, with organizations like Seeds of Peace using his forgiveness to mediate Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. The United Nations Interfaith Harmony Week highlights Genesis 45 alongside Surah Yusuf 12 hours 92 minutes to promote global unity. Restorative justice initiatives, such as Prison Fellowship, draw on Judah's Teshuvah, Genesis 44:1834, to facilitate offender-victim dialogue, influencing criminal justice reforms across Europe and North America. Gender equity and feminist theology. Tamar's agency in securing her lineage, Genesis 38:1426, resonates with feminist theology, with Jewish scholars like Rachel Adler reinterpreting her role to advocate for gender equity. Christian feminist theologians like Elizabeth Scusola Fiorenza use Tamar to champion marginalized women, aligning with broader movements for equality. Muslim women's advocacy groups, such as Sisters in Islam, draw on related figures like Hagar, Genesis 21, and Tamar to advance women's rights, supporting UN Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equality. Environmental stewardship. Joseph's land management during the famine, Genesis 47:1326, informs Jewish principles of Baal Tashkit, do not destroy, with groups like Hazan citing Genesis 41 to promote sustainable agriculture. Christian eco-theology, as articulated in Pope Francis' Laudato Si', and Islamic environmental declarations use Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes to advocate for creation care and climate action. Racial and social justice. The unity of Joseph and his brothers, Genesis 45:14-15, inspires racial justice efforts, with Black Jewish communities like Beth Shalom using Genesis 49 to address systemic inequities. Christian liberation theologians like James Cone cite Joseph's providence, Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes, as a source of resilience for oppressed communities. Interfaith coalitions, such as the Poor People's Campaign, draw on Genesis 45 to combat poverty, aligning with UN Sustainable Development Goal 1 to eradicate extreme poverty. Contemporary context. Global migration, with over 281 million migrants reported by the UN, and climate crises documented by NOAA amplify the narrative's themes. Joseph's leadership in crisis, Genesis 41, guides humanitarian responses by organizations like Oxfam, addressing displacement and resource scarcity. Cultural significance. The narrative's advocacy bridges faith-based and secular activism, with Chaste and Teshuvah shaping policies and grassroots movements. Its ethical legacy continues to influence global and local initiatives for justice and sustainability. For interfaith and intercultural dialogue. The Joseph narrative fosters interfaith and intercultural dialogue, leveraging its shared Abrahamic heritage to address religious tensions, cultural divides, and global cooperation. Interfaith dialogue. Abrahamic cooperation, Genesis 45:415 and Surah Yusuf 12 hours 92 minutes inspire initiatives like the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi, which cites Joseph's reconciliation as a model for peace. The Abrahamic Business Circle uses Genesis 41 to promote economic collaboration among Jewish, Christian, and Muslim leaders. Shared narratives, Joseph's dreams, Genesis 37:511, Quran 12:4-6, and leadership, Genesis 41:40-46, Quran 12:54-56, facilitate theological exchange, with groups like Scriptural Reasoning exploring these parallels to deepen mutual understanding. Practical initiatives. Religions for Peace leverages Genesis 45 and Surah Yusuf for conflict resolution, addressing poverty and climate crises in alignment with UN Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action. Intercultural dialogue. Cultural exchange. The Abraham Path Initiative retraces Joseph's journey from Canaan to Egypt, promoting tourism and dialogue across the Middle East. Virtual tours on platforms like Google Arts and Culture make Genesis 3750 accessible to global audiences, fostering cross-cultural appreciation. Multiculturalism. The narrative's inclusivity, exemplified by Asian authors' integration, Genesis 41 hours 45 minutes, supports diversity policies in cities like Toronto, which cite Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes to promote migrant inclusion. Conflict resolution. Genesis 45:415 informs mediation efforts, with the Perez Center for Peace using Joseph's story to bridge Israeli-Palestinian divides through dialogue and education. Contemporary context. Rising religious polarization, as documented by Gallup, underscores the need for interfaith dialogue, with Genesis 45 serving as a counterpoint to extremism. Globalization increases intercultural interactions, with Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes informing integration strategies in diverse societies. Cultural significance. The narrative's applications in dialogue bridge religious and cultural divides, with Joseph's universal vision shaping peace initiatives at local and global levels. It also inspires educational and tourism projects that promote pluralistic understanding. 5. Cultural innovation and digital engagement. The Joseph narrative drives cultural innovation, influencing art, literature, media, and digital platforms, adapting its timeless themes to contemporary creative and technological contexts. Art and visual culture. Contemporary artists reinterpret Genesis 3750, with a BBNA photographic series Joseph depicting him as a modern figure grappling with identity and exile. Interfaith installations at events like the Venice Biennale use Genesis 49's tribal motifs to explore unity and diversity. Virtual reality exhibits at institutions like the Israel Museum recreate settings like Avaris and Hebron, immersing audiences in the narrative's world. Augmented reality apps like Bible VR animate Genesis 3750, engaging younger generations with interactive storytelling. Literature and storytelling. Modern literature reimagines the narrative, with works like Colm Twain's The Testament of Mary reflecting on maternal perspectives akin to those in Genesis. Graphic novels such as the comic Torah depict Joseph's journey for educational purposes, blending humor and insight. Secular authors like Salman Rushdie engage Abrahamic themes, while children's books from PJ Library introduce Genesis 3750 to young readers, fostering cultural literacy across generations. Media and film. Animated films like Joseph, King of Dreams focus on Genesis 3745, bringing the story to family audiences, while documentaries on PBS explore archaeological ties to Avaris, grounding the narrative in history. Streaming platforms like Netflix feature Genesis-inspired series, reaching global viewers. Social media campaigns with hashtags like #JosephStories share Genesis 45 for reconciliation, with influencers retelling Joseph's journey to millions of followers on platforms like Instagram. Digital engagement. Online platforms preserve the narrative's legacy, with Spheria offering midrashic commentaries on Genesis 37:50, accessed by millions worldwide. YouVersion's Christian devotionals on Joseph's leadership boast hundreds of millions of downloads, reflecting broad digital reach. Islamic platforms like Alim integrate Surah Yusuf with Genesis parallels, while interfaith apps like Peace Hub use Genesis 45 to connect users across traditions. AI-driven tools on MyJewish Learning provide personalized insights into Genesis 37:50, enhancing accessibility. Contemporary context. The digital revolution, with billions of Internet users reported by the ITU, amplifies the narrative's reach, making its themes resonate in virtual communities. The shift to online spirituality post-COVID, as noted by BBNA Group, underscores its adaptability to modern worship trends. Cultural significance. Cultural innovations ensure the narrative's relevance, with art, literature, and media adapting its themes for diverse audiences. Digital engagement preserves its legacy, fostering global dialogue and education in an interconnected age. 6. Synthesis, a timeless guide for modern challenges. The contemporary relevance and applications of Genesis 37:50 reveal its enduring capacity to address modern challenges with theological depth and ethical wisdom. In religious renewal, it inspires Jewish, Christian, and Muslim spirituality, offering providence, Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes, and reconciliation, Genesis 45:415, as anchors for resilience. Ethical frameworks guide personal and societal morality, with Joseph's leadership, Genesis 41, and Judah's Teshuvah, Genesis 44, shaping governance and inclusivity. Social movements leverage its themes for reconciliation, gender equity, environmental stewardship, and justice, aligning with global goals like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue bridge divides, with Joseph's universal vision promoting peace. Cultural innovations ensure its vitality, with digital platforms making it accessible to new generations. Rooted in ancient contexts yet adaptable to modern needs, Genesis 37:50 provides a moral and spiritual compass for navigating pluralism, polarization, and global crises, inviting all to engage its vision of faith, justice, and unity. Impact on modern issues. The narrative addresses pressing concerns like migration, climate change, and social inequities, with its ethics informing policies and activism worldwide. Its interfaith applications counter polarization, supporting initiatives like the Abraham Accords that seek regional peace. Cultural and religious significance. It unifies religious communities, shapes ethical discourse, and inspires cultural creativity, ensuring its relevance across traditions and secular contexts. Digital presence democratizes access, fostering dialogue and education on a global scale. Future potential. Emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and virtual reality will expand its reach, with Genesis 37:50 informing future ethical and cultural frameworks. Its universal themes will address evolving challenges, from technological ethics to interstellar exploration, offering timeless wisdom. 7. Conclusion: a living legacy for the 21st century. The Joseph narrative's contemporary relevance and applications affirm its role as a living legacy, providing profound insights for a complex, interconnected world. Its spiritual applications renew faith across traditions, addressing disconnection with covenantal hope. Ethical frameworks guide morality and leadership, fostering inclusivity amidst division. Social movements draw on its themes to advocate for justice, equity, and sustainability. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue bridge divides, promoting peace through shared heritage. Cultural innovations ensure its vitality, with art, literature, and digital platforms adapting its stories for new generations. From ancient Egypt to modern challenges, Genesis 37:50 offers a vision of divine providence, ethical responsibility, and communal unity, resonating in religious sanctuaries, policy forums, and cultural spaces. As a foundation for the Torah's redemptive arc, it invites all to engage its transformative wisdom, shaping a future of faith, justice, and global solidarity. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.